attack by a group of Saudi Hezbollah members. And that was discovered fairly shortly after the events because the host country, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, had detained and arrested several of the actors who said, yes, we were recruited by the IRGC, we were trained in the Bekaa, we got our passports at the Iranian embassy in Damascus, and we got $100,000 cash from General Sharifi. When Khobar Towers occurred, the President of the United States, appropriately so, from the Oval Office, said that this attack against the United States would not go unpunished and no stone would be left unturned to bring the perpetrators to justice. So our charge was to conduct an investigation. Our first note was, do you want us to conduct a criminal investigation because that may interfere with whatever other policy decisions you may or may not make? The answer was no. Conduct the investigation. So we deployed several hundred FBI agents and personnel to Saudi Arabia who conducted crime scene investigations, interviews, in conjunction with the Saudi Mubahith, which is their police force. It became very clear after a short period of time that the perpetrators of the attack were IRGC trained, planned, and funded. The attack only resulted, tragically, in the death of 19 Americans. 372 were wounded. The reason for that fortuity was the truck was placed perpendicular to Building 131, which was the Khobar barracks. Had it been placed in a parallel fashion, the whole building would have come down and several hundred people would have been killed. It became very apparent during the investigation that we needed to get direct access to the defendants, subjects who had been detained by the Saudis, 5 of whom were arrested in the immediate environment of the crime a short time afterwards. So our necessity was to get a very senior, i.e. the President or the Vice President of the United States, to make the request that FBI agents be allowed to conduct the interviews. So for a long period of time, we wrote talking points for the President, for the Vice President. They would meet with the Crown Prince or someone else from Saudi Arabia. And we always got back the response from the Saudis, well, they never made the request. And that became very apparent after a short period of time that that request was not being made. Other requests were being made, but not the one that was really critical for our investigation. And this was the period, as some of my colleagues have noted, where the rapprochement and the new moderate government appeared to be taking place. Government under which, by the way, all of these nuclear reactors were built. So I recall getting a phone call one morning from the Secretary of State, and she said, the Iranians are complaining because your FBI agents are fingerprinting them when they come into the United States. And I said, well, of course, we've been doing that for a long period of time because, as you know, Madam Secretary, the MOIS agents sometimes come in with the wrestling team. It's usually the guy who's a little bit unfit, but he's the MOIS agent, and that's why we fingerprint them. And she said, well, you have to stop because they're very upset. So on and on the investigation went, and we reached the point, after a very difficult period of time, within the administration in the United States, not on the crime scene side, where we got substantial evidence that this attack was committed by the IRGC, and the permission that we finally received by the Saudi government to interview the detainees was really the result of us using channels outside of the government and outside of the administration, because we could not get any assistance within the administration with respect to making the request. And the reason was simple. They did not want to confront the fact and the reality that the Iranian government had murdered 19 Americans and blown up Khobar Towers. And as investigators, we accepted that. That's a foreign policy matter which goes way beyond our jurisdiction and our pay grade. So we would go back repeatedly and say, do you want us to stop conducting the investigation? And the answer would always be, no, we want you to conduct a vigorous investigation, find all the evidence, and charge whoever can be charged. And this is the confusion and an example of the confusion of that policy, which in many respects continues today through a new administration with regard to the MEK listing, with regard to Camp Ashraf, and with regard to this lack of clarity and lack of purpose in terms of achieving what are very basic objectives here. After we finally got access in an evidentiary fashion exactly what had happened, and we felt we had at that point proved to indict a number of people under our extraterritorial anti-terrorism laws for the murder of 19 Americans. So anyway, they called a meeting in the White House as a result of this information. And the usual senior people were invited to the meeting. It was in the room in the White House where I think everybody on my left here has been on a number of occasions. The Attorney General and I thought the purpose of the meeting was to discuss what the result would be of this information and what would happen. So at the meeting, the National Security Advisor handed out 2 documents. And when we got them, we were a little bit surprised to read them. They were 2 press statements. One was for the Republicans on the Hill, and the other one was for the reporters. And I had I asked the question. I said, I thought we were here to talk about this evidence and what we're going to do. And they said, yes, we're going to get to that. But first we have to talk about how we respond to the issue of whether or not the Iranian government was involved in this attack. Well, I said, you can delete the whether from this draft because we have substantial evidence that they were involved in the attack. And then somebody said to me, who was a lawyer, well, that's all hearsay, which was a very surprising question to hear from the National Security Advisor. And I said, actually, it's a statement in furtherance of a conspiracy by a co-conspirator, and that's an exception to the hearsay rule. But I think, from my perspective, we reached the result that we intended to reach with respect to Khobar Towers. We indicted 14 people on 46 counts for the murder of those Americans. We have sanctions that I think are working better. I spend a lot of time in Europe working for corporations. I see within some of those corporations very resolute attempts to make sure that those sanctions are not violated because of the economic and political consequences that they would have for that company and that country. The amazing heroics that everybody witnessed after the 2009 elections on the streets of Tehran. It was almost a critical mass. It was almost exactly where it should have ended. It didn't dissipate. Those young men and women, those heroes, that's not been erased. That's not been compromised. It's there. It's powerful. All of the sanctions, all of the work that is done covertly and overtly through diplomatic channels, through military channels, through intelligence, law enforcement channels. And the objective here is to support the strongest combination and the strongest thrust point for what we want to achieve. And that is going to be on the streets and homes and colleges in that huge and great country. And it's going to probably happen, I would predict, within the near term. I don't think you can keep that kind of force under wraps and restrained with the longevity and the sustainability that the regime would certainly like. So your work here and the seminar is very, very timely. I think you add very powerful elements to this comprehensive and irreversible movement and force which the policymakers will have to respond to. They've already responded to it, but your sustaining this issue and your dedication to this issue will take it for those next few steps, next few critical steps, and how those are executed and balanced